Hello, everyone, and welcome to this panel called Moving the Needle, Building a Sustainable Patient Advocacy Movement to Advance Public Policy Goals. I'm Kevin McCormack, the Director of Patient Advocacy at the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, or CIRM. We're California's stem cell and gene therapy agency, and we fund stem cell and gene therapy research here in California. Patient advocacy has been at the very heart of what we do ever since we were created back in 2004. I'll talk a bit more about our mission in a few minutes, but we have a great panel of experts joining us for today, so let's not waste any time in hearing from them. Melissa King is with the Regenerative Medicine Foundation, a longtime advocate with Americans for Cures. Adrian Shapiro is the mother of a daughter with sickle cell disease, the founder of Access Advocacy, a support group for families with sickle cell, and a great champion of stem cell research. And lastly, but by no means least, is Jacqueline Hangton. She's also a longtime advocate with Americans for Cures and is now a senior advisor on community outreach for CIRM. Ladies, welcome. And Melissa, if you could start off by talking about the work that you do.
Sure. Thank you so much, Kevin. And thank you to Bernie, as always, for organizing such a wonderful event in the World Stem Cell Summit. It's a pleasure and an honor to be on a panel led by you, Kevin, in your role leading communications and patient advocacy at CIRM, a place that you know is near and dear to my heart. I started on I would say my patient advocacy journey when I volunteered for and then became part of the team for the Prop 71 campaign in California in 2004, which was a statewide citizen-driven ballot initiative that we got passed that created our own funding agency in California to fund stem cell and related research here with bond funding. And at the time, that was necessary because this research, which the scientific community believed had so much promise, was not able to be funded much at the federal level. And it really turned out barely at all for a specific reason that I won't go into that here. But in addition to that, and having come back to do the same work again on another initiative in 2020, it's very clear to me now that it makes so much sense to do this at the state level in California because we are such a large state and we have so many world-class institutions here in California at which research like stem cell research and other medical research can be done. Our economy is the 5th or 6th biggest in the world, depending on which economist you talk to, which means we're behind the US, China, France, the UK, maybe that's it, or maybe Germany too, right? Just as the state of California. And so I was part of the campaign in 2004. Then I played, luckily for me, a fascinatingly central role in the building of CIRM, the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, from scratch. Took the board through 1,500 hours of public meetings during which they developed the processes and policies that are still largely in place today. As you know, over the years, they've been tweaked or added to on the margins, but very proud of the work that CIRM has accomplished and the evolution of the field, which CIRM played a huge role in, to the point where that by 2017, 18, when we were considering going back to the ballot to renew the funding for CIRM, which was going to run out sometime, 2020-ish, we had an amazing body of work to talk about. The field had evolved to the point where we had numerous clinical trials happening in California and around the world, of course. And so then I was part of the team. I headed up field operations, among other aspects of the Prop 14 campaign in 2020 to get another 5.5 billion in funding, more this time, because clinical trials cost more, to continue this research. And I came back to it this time having been a patient with a chronic disease. I'm a breast cancer survivor and had an even more vigorous appreciation for what medical research can do for us as patients, should we be so unlucky as to end up in that chair. Continuing the work, the advocacy work, I'm still leading a nonprofit, Americans for Cures, that I rejoined, having founded it back in 2004 under a different name, to support the early days of CIRM before we could get hired and the board could vote to pay us, the people that worked there in the first few years. I'm running this nonprofit that then laid the groundwork for Prop 14. And with Jacqueline as my partner in crime, we are providing curriculum to students in the CIRM Bridges program on patient advocacy and policy and communications and the important intersection of those. And I guess I would say probably one of the most important things for me to share as a patient advocate is that, yes, it is about advocating for patients, and that might be yourself or a family member, a loved one, a friend, or all patients of a particular disease, or maybe all patients that can benefit from medical research. One of the most important things for me to impart is that policy matters at the federal level, in other countries as well, not just the US, because the World Stem Cell Summit obviously has a global audience. Policy matters at the national level, at the state level, and at local levels in terms of getting research done, getting patients the services and the treatments that they need, and providing access to the people that can't access it as easily as others for different reasons. And so I just would encourage anybody with any interest at all in patient advocacy to consider that while you can absolutely be an advocate for a person or a group of people or all people, that part is a beautiful and wonderful piece of it. But should you be so inclined, we need you involved in policy and in communicating out about the value and the successes of the medical research happening around the world. Thank you.
Adrian, if you'd like to tell us a bit about the work that you've been doing over the years.
So I'm a mother. I'm a fifth generation mother in my family with a child with sickle cell disease. And we managed to get her through her childhood and even through university before problems really became insurmountable. And we had an option at one point, we thought, for a bone marrow transplant, right? And so we couldn't find a match. There were no matches. She has a half sister. They weren't a good match. Her cord blood wouldn't work for the cord blood match, any kind of match. So that's how I came to stem cells as being the answer to my problem. And when it really became real, I actually contacted CIRM and said, this is so funny. I called up and I said, I'm a mom and I think you're ready for me. I had no idea what that meant. And luckily, it probably was talking to you, I don't know, to Kevin. The answer was, go to, there's a meeting. Why don't you go to the World Stem Cell Summit in San Diego? And I said, okay, not really understanding what was going to happen at that point. When I got there, it was amazing. I was in this huge conference center in San Diego with all of these scientists from all over the world and all of these advocates who, like me, I think were there for their own child, right? Again, but seeing really what the promise of stem cells meant and how important it was. And I think it was there that I finally understood what my mission was going to be, which was not only for my child, but for stem cell research because of the promise. And coming from a family where generation after generation, you have children and mothers and fathers and family members suffering, to be in a place where you could make a difference to stop that cycle from for further generations, but not only for sickle cell, but for Huntington's disease, for baby bubble disease, for spinal cord injuries. It, for me, gave me something outside of myself, bigger than myself. I think that when you have a child or a loved one who has a particular condition, you do become very much focused on them, and your world gets reduced and reduced and reduced to making sure that your person is taken care of. And what stem cell research showed me was that every win for every disease was actually a win for us. And I found, it's kind of funny, but I kind of found my tribe. And my tribe was people who were making or discovering space in their hearts and their minds for something bigger than themselves. And it made my journey with my daughter easier, because not only did I have hope, I had family that understood, right? I didn't have to explain a lot about what happens to your life when you have a chronic disease. I didn't have to explain what we had done to make her sick, because they understood. And we all were able to, as a group, really get outside of our own pain. And it made us, how can I put it? It gave us strength. It took us from just mama bear to super mom when we had each other. And I think for me, that was the turning point. And it made me change everything I wanted to do with my organization. I knew that with the organization, where initially we were only concerned about sickle cell and maybe getting people in clinical trials, we saw how important it was to keep stem cell research going and keep it in California. And we were able to do a deep dive and be able to have that conversation, taking our own stories and telling our stories and the hope that we were getting, but also what it meant for the state of California. And it's done amazing things for California. I mean, you hear me say this all the time. I don't think we shout it out enough, but we've got this great brain trust. And we have these students who are coming from all over California and all over the states and all over the world who want to come to California because we have stem cell research going on here. We have jobs that when I'm talking to little kids and I say, what do you want to be? And they'll say, you know, I want to be a doctor. I want to be, you know, a researcher. And I say, look at stem cells, because there are so many other things that you don't even have any idea about, right? That are exciting and wonderful, and they're here for you. So I think for me, this sounds really corny, but I'm living my best life because of CIRM. I'm living at a time where sickle cell has gotten some attention, where after 100+ years, we got no attention. CIRM made the largest investment ever in sickle cell research. We are very, very close to having a cure, a universal cure. And one of the things I learned, as you've already heard, that policy and legislation is very important. It's helped give me a voice and an understanding of what the processes are, because at first I had no idea. I fought battles, I thought important battles at the hospital for my child, for other people's children, but those were all one-off. And so I realized, and through CIRM, was educated on what those processes are that you need to be a part of, who makes those decisions. And if you're fortunate enough to get a cure or a new treatment, how do you get access? And what are the things we need to do to ensure that we have access to it and others have access to it? So I think that for me, I'm going to say the most important thing I have learned is that I wasn't alone, that my voice, let's see, how can I put it? My voice was amplified, right? And that you have to have curiosity. You have to be curious enough to get outside of your own vision and see what the promise is in front of you, not just for you, but for everyone. And I think for me that was it, right? And I think my strongest tool, and thanks to all of you, I keep coming back to the entire team, was communication. That even for a person like me, who was very much an introvert, that I could have a voice, and I'm really good at listening, and that being able to listen and learn made me very effective when I finally learned how to speak. So show up, speak, stand up.
Thank you, Adrian. I remember when we first met and you said, I don't really know what I'm doing or why I'm here. And I know that you learned pretty quickly. You learned very quickly. And ever since then, you've been such a powerful voice for the patients and the patient advocates, and a really strong reminder to all of us of why we do this, not just at CIRM, but the researchers, the students coming up that you've talked to over the years, that the reason why we do this is the patients, and that all our focus has to be on that and not just some kind of academic interest or this is just my job. It's not. I mean, we have a mission, and you help remind us of that every day. Jacqueline, can we hear from you now, please?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for the opportunity to be here and speak on behalf of this whole initiative, World Stem Cell, Bernie and CIRM. Thank you. I want to say, just Adrian, something that you just mentioned reminded me of one of my very, very first speaking engagements with Prop 71. Like Kevin mentioned, I worked tirelessly with Melissa back in 2004 when I first got engaged with the initiative. I had the fortune of living about 2 miles from in Palo Alto area, where the headquarters were practically, aside from the communication that was down here in LA. But I started as a volunteer, and I'll tell you that story backwards. But we were building a speakers bureau for the Prop 71. So we're going to Rotary clubs and all sorts of clubs and agencies, anyone that would have us. It was obviously a very different time, and we were able to do that. So we got to a capacity where we had more engagements than speakers. So one of the women that I was working with closely on the campaign, I was like, well, I need a speaker for this day, and I need a speaker for this day, and she said, we're out of speakers, you have to do it. I said, well, no, I don't know the material enough well, I don't know. She's like, yes, you do, and you're gonna be fine. This comes to you from here. A detail missing is okay. Speak from your heart, you're fine. No one knows this stuff better than you. And it really thrust me into a communications position where I was speaking about patient advocacy and policy to a large extent, because we were a ballot initiative, and communicating effectively. And that really thrust me into this entire world. In that way, it's one thing to kind of be behind the scene and get things done and make things happen, but being forced to stand in front of large size audiences and or small and tell them what this is all about. And it's about all of this patient advocacy. We come to it with our hearts first and foremost, and then and that most likely, sadly, it's because we have a friend, a family member, or someone in our world and orbits that has been touched by a chronic disease or illness. And in my case, it was my father, who we sadly lost almost a year ago, which is just heartbreaking every single day. I don't need a reminder why I do this. because I'd like to have him right by my side. But my dad sustained a spinal cord injury in 2001, and propelled me to figure out, like, how are we going to make his world better and collectively ours? And, you know, simultaneously with his own ambition, again, had the good fortune of living in Palo Alto at the time, and learned of the proposition that was, that was soon to be on the ballot. And I said, I have to get involved. And CIRM has done enormous work on behalf of spinal cord injuries, in addition to so many others, like everyone's touched upon right now. And our worlds are greatly expanded as a result of the advocacy work that we're doing collectively as we are coming together. And I get to know each and every one of you very, very well because of our hearts, and then our determination and our might and the power of the collective force to make a difference. And that is either, if that's a one-off in the hospital, that's okay, that fight, but it's a much larger ambition. And that is changing on the policy level, changing legislatively, changing statewide. And in California, like each of us know and are able to be part of, CIRM is just, California took it into its own hands to make a difference. And we have made a huge difference, and we will continue to do so. I was talking to a patient advocate champion yesterday, and there's things that we don't think about. We don't think about. One of her large issues that she's taking on for many, many years, this is in Huntington's disease, is training the police force to not just make assumptions about pedestrians or other people, but that pedestrians who may or may not be involved in some sort of activity that might be some wrongdoing, might have a disease, might have an ailment that it doesn't allow them to walk or engage or speak back or return a question in a way that someone who's not injured or affected does. And it's that work too that we must be engaged in and promote when we talk about advocacy. It's not just in the lab, and it very much starts in the lab, and it's with our students that we touch, and we connect them with the Bridges students. We connect them with patient advocates and invite them to be part of a larger audience, to participate in patient advocacy organization meetings. So it's kind of very robust, the work that we need to do, that we do, and the work that we will continue to do to mitigate suffering and pain and chronic disease, so that we can come together in a way and celebrate the joys and relief of treatments and cures.
Great. Thank you, Jacqueline. And I thought your dog made some excellent points there as well. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm the Director of Patient Advocacy at CIRM. And patient advocates have been a huge part of everything that we've done since we began and continue to be now. They're on our governing board. We have many members on our governing board who are patient advocates for different diseases, and they help guide the policies and processes that we adopt. They're on the panel of experts who review the applications for funding. So again, they have a big say and a big role in determining the kind of projects we fund, the kind of diseases that are targeted by the money that we are able to provide. And whenever we fund a clinical trial, we always create what we call a CAP, or clinical advisory panel. And this helps guide the researchers through some problems. I mean, many of them may not have done a clinical trial before, or this is kind of first in human that they're testing these therapies. So we always make sure that we have a clinical advisory panel, including a patient representative, because they better than anyone else know exactly what's going on for the patients with this disease. And so we want to make sure that as this team puts together a clinical trial, that it's designed around the needs of the patient and not just about the kind of the goals of the researchers. The research is obviously very important, but without the patients, none of this really matters. So we make sure that the patient representatives, patient advocates, are central to all of that and to everything that we do. We're fortunate to have some amazing people on these CAPs, like Adrian And I think it's safe to say that without their presence, some of these clinical trials would have failed to recruit enough patients or retain them for their work. So they play a really important role in not just kind of being a voice, but supporting and guiding this research with these researchers. But this is clearly not enough. I think in the last couple of years, we've seen some glaring inadequacies and disparities, not just in our healthcare system, but in the research system as well. Clinical trials too often overlook communities of color or communities that have low income, that are rural, where people don't have the resources to get to a major urban center where many of these clinical trials are on. And at CIRM, we're trying to do something about this. We're trying to make it better, make it easier for everyone to be part of a clinical trial. We now require any researcher who applies to us for funding, for example, to have a written plan for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's one of the things that we determine whether or not we want to fund them on, based on that plan. So perhaps I'd like to begin this conversation here now when at CIRM, we're trying to do more and more outreach into these communities of color, low-income communities. So how important a role are patient advocates, would you say, ladies, in doing this and helping break down some of the barriers that exist out there, some of the concerns and some of the mistrust that has built up over the years?
Oh, I'm going to say very important. And I know for us, we first kind of went into it kind of naively. I did, thinking, I mean, my kid's gonna be cured. You know, what do you mean you don't know? You don't know. I mean, what problem do you have? And then I had to step back and say, okay, so for me, all my life, I believed that science was going to fix it. And now here I was. And so I think I had to really listen, because my first reaction was to say, this doesn't make any sense. And once I really dug into their concerns, it sort of surprised me, but not. So the concerns really weren't that they didn't believe in science. They believed in science, or that, you know, there were some things like Tuskegee and a few other things that were causing hesitancy. But it really came down to that they had had such a horrible time at their point of care. So it was mistrust, not so much in science as mistrust in the medical community. And then once I understood that, I was like, oh, well, I can relate to that, right? And so that was where I got my first understanding that I needed to be able to say, yes, I understand that I had experienced it. And then to have the discussion about what was different about CIRM's science and past, and why what happened before could not happen again. And talk about the fact that I was on a cap, and what that meant and what I was able to change. For example, having them add psychosocial support, having them think about how scheduling would affect someone who didn't have a lot of resources, and how getting them to really understand what we mean when we say resources, when we're talking about gas money for the car, or being able to park, or being able to take off from a job that you don't get paid on. And so once I could really talk about those sorts of things, then because I was a trusted voice and I understood, and then said, you know, I will walk through this journey with you, then people were willing to more. And then those people, as they were able to understand how to talk about it, right? Because this is something people forget. This is not anything that you've ever been able to talk about before. I mean, before clinical trial was, I take a pill, you know, I go in, I try some kind of machine, you know, but having, using your own body, right, and changing it was something never ever done. And I think that also is part of the conversation we have to have, you know, I've had to have. And now we're finding that even though you can apply for a bone marrow transplant, if you can find a match, patients are coming forward and they are all inquiring about gene therapy. So in my community, it's really caught on as we've had many successes. But, you know, we are human and we're living with a lot of other things other than or along with sickle cell. So stem cell therapies carry much promise for my community going forward. Heart problems, diabetes, you know, obesity, many of those things that we struggle with. Even food, even, you know, now with the work that's being done with food. So I think, and I really think that CIRM has done a really good job now of getting out what they're doing. And because they have these requirements for inclusion, which we never had that before either, right? So whenever they talked about inclusion, they would be talking about things like having an inclusive patient cohort, meaning who's going to be testing it, right? But they weren't talking before about who's actually making up those teams that are going to be carrying on the research. And that's really big, to be able to go into a room where you're going to be talking about altering your body and being able to look across the table and see people that look like you or people that are like in your community. I think that seeing in many ways is believing, and that's what we're moving towards.
So Melissa and Jacqueline, you've both had a lot of experience in political campaigns and helping to kind of recruit patient advocates, train them. What makes a good patient advocate? When you see someone, what is it about them that makes you think this person could be really good?
No.
I was going to do the same gesture towards you. Yeah, I think ultimately it's you know, their determination. It's kind of the motivation, their fire, and their what sparked them, what put them in a position to want to engage in this type of work. It's a spirit. People could be trained, you know, and sometimes, you know, a lot of things are just about education. But first and foremost, people come to us, they, you know, and organizations that we reach out to, because there's right. I mean, there's a desperation too. There's a need to show up and stand forward, stand up and figuratively or otherwise, and say we need to make things happen. And there's lots of good ways to be a patient advocate too. Somebody could be super great at, you know, writing, you know, content, but is not going to be face of a movement, of an organization, and that's okay too. We're happy to help frame and work with, you know, with people, students. In Prop 14, we had this amazing, you know, and we did this at a very, very challenging time. We were in a pandemic, so everyone was afraid of you know, contagion of this disease, and here we were, not knocking on people's doors, literally, but every other way possible, we were, and saying, we need you to speak out, we need you to show up, we need your vote, and this is why. And we were able to do that, and we built this, and Melissa can talk more about this as well. We built a student ambassador program where we had these amazing students from across, you know, the state who showed up with us and joined our patient medical advisory and advocacy committee to do just that. And if we didn't know exactly how to do it alone, you know, collectively, Adrienne served on this committee. You were there with others to learn and hear and understand the overlapping relevance of patient advocacy and what that means. Melissa, you want to?
Yeah, and I think, you really covered it, and just to follow up on some things that Adrian said, and what you said, Jacqueline, is I would say, what makes a good patient advocate, to Kevin's question? Well, someone who has that spark of interest in whether it's the plight of a patient with a particular disease and wanting to get involved in services and treatments for that patient, or someone who comes at it more from an interest in the medical research and the science. People advocating on behalf of research are actually ultimately patient advocates, because the science and the research ultimately in the medical research arena is going to lead to better outcomes for patients. So it really is patient advocacy. And to some of what Adrian was talking about, I think, Kevin, to identify a patient advocate, it's someone with an interest in whether it's the plight of a particular person that they know that is a patient, or just patients in general. They learn about it through some sort of very good marketing program, if you will, from a nonprofit focused on a particular disease area. But then what makes a good patient advocate over time is someone that will listen and will learn what the issues are. And I think doing that inspires people to do even more than they may have initially thought they were going to do, if they come at it because they're concerned for or want to help a friend or a family member, a loved one, a child suffering with a particular disease. But then they learn about the issues that affect patients, whether it's policy around funding for research or access to treatments and clinical trials, or any other of various types of policy that can affect people in terms of living with a chronic illness or disease. And one of the things that we often see now in the world of patient advocacy is a growing field. There are more and more people that get involved. And again, that's because there are some very good organizations out there that do a good job of marketing, if you will, the needs of the patients related to their organization. And of course, that benefits all of us. But one thing that we'll see is that the policy needle will be moved for people that have a particular disease, because the organizations focused on that disease somehow do an excellent job of getting legislation passed, or getting a lot of recognition for, and therefore more research dollars toward a particular disease area. And then we'll see people focus on a different disease area that's actually quite similar and just as devastating, but there isn't policy in place to help them in the same way that the other policy was written, and they'll work on it for years. So that's the other thing, is that if you're looking for something to do, you can spend your life as a patient advocate, because some of the work takes years. For some of it, there's instant gratification, and there's also an instant need. When like Jacqueline talked about going to a hospital and being there with a patient, or talking with patients over time as they are experiencing their day-to-day lives and figuring out what their needs are, their immediate needs are, and addressing those. That's one thing that you can do, but you can also spend years trying to make sure that the recognition is there about these diseases, and the research that needs to be done, and what the patient's needs are, and the policy either creation or changes are that need to be carried out in order to address those needs. So I'll stop there. Great panel, lots of great experience in thinking, and you don't need to hear more from me. You can hear more from everybody else.
But we always love to hear more from you, Melissa. Anyway, sorry, Jacqueline.
I just want to just conclude with that, which was wonderful, but it's that, can-do attitude. That's yes. Kevin, for example, tried and true. You asked us to join an advocacy panel. The answer is always yes. With this, box of people, and there are countless others that each of us know in our own contact lists. But it's like, I need you. That the answer is yes. What in this world, it's always yes. And the more, the better.
So one last question for all of you. If you were going to give people advice, one piece of advice on how to become a good and an effective patient advocate, what would it be? Let's start with Adrian.
I was going to give them one piece of advice. I think for me, it really is that once you step into the advocacy space, really, Hartley, you're never alone again. That when you have a sick child or a sick family member, your blood family will many times just fall away like rose petals. Your life falls away like rose petals. And you get to a point where you really think you're alone or you can't talk about your personal life, what's happening, because people don't want to hear it. But when you become an advocate, you get a found family that gets you. You don't have to say why your kid is in the hospital. You know, you don't have to say why. All you have to say is, you know, my kid's there. Or you don't have to say, I'm going to go to Sacramento and talk, right? Try to find legislators. You don't have to explain your life. And then that's what fuels you. It fuels you because you'll run out of fuel if you're just your child. But as a patient advocate, you've got many children. You've got many aunts and uncles and cousins and all of that, right? And godfathers and godmothers, right? So I think that I would say to anybody that's kind of on the outside, like getting ready to hop in or thinking about it, to just go to the World Stem Cell Summit. just step in and you'll see it. The community then provides you with so much of what you need, and you don't even know you need. You don't even know it's possible. And I want to say thank you to Bernie, who I always follow around and call him, you know, the president of, he's the president of Stem Cell, right? But his beautiful wife, Cheryl, she's the first lady.
Melissa, Jacqueline?
Sure. I would say to be an effective patient advocate, one of the most important things to do is to look around in the arena. So the concept of Teddy Roosevelt's, he said man in the arena, but person in the arena, and figure out what each of those people actually needs and address as many of those as you can. And maybe it's just one, but when I say the people in the arena, I mean starting with the patient suffering with the disease, then their family members and loved ones who may be in a caretaking role for them, or maybe just are supporting them and then therefore in need of support themselves. But then there's also the doctors that work with them and the other medical professionals, nurses and others. And then there are the people doing the research, trying to make the treatments and cures come about and the treatments better and the overall experience better. And then there are the people in administrative leadership roles at these academic research centers where the research is being done, or other institutions where the research is being done. That's most of who is in the arena when you're talking about patient advocacy and chronic illness and disease. Patient, loved one, family member, medical professionals, people doing the research, trying to make it better, and then people at the academic medical centers. And actually, let me change that and add people that are in the biotech and pharma industry, because we need industry too to bring treatments and hopefully cures to a broader audience. So they're a must-have component of getting treatments out to the larger population, whether it's in the state, the nation, or the world. Take a look at what all of those people need and try and address that. The patient needs, I'm not going to say it's the easiest, but it's perhaps the most obvious thing to address. It's not always obvious to address the needs of their family members. And yet that's very important as we learn, especially when we're talking about diseases like Alzheimer's and others that lend themselves to requiring a family member or loved one to provide care over many years. What do the medical professionals need? What if you really talk to the doctors that are working with patients with a particular disease, what do they see? What are the problems that they see? Because the researchers may not know, and the administrators may not know, and the patients may not even know what the frustrations of the doctors are and the nurses. They probably have some ideas that could help us write better policy, put funding in the right places. And then, of course, you know, what do the researchers need? Usually funding for their researchers, but there may be other things too. Find out what everybody actually in the arena needs and try to address that. Thank you.
I think both very well said on both accounts. So I'll just add to that is saying yes and showing up. You know, the rest can be learned, and then you'll find your, you know, person can find their area of expertise or skill base that really kind of suits them, you know, and just, it's about education and awareness, and every little bit helps. Every little bit helps. So thank you.
Hear, hear.
Well said. Ladies, thank you so much. This has been delightful. It's always fun talking to you. I always learn so much. And thank you all for wearing pink. It's not necessary to be a patient advocate to wear pink, but it's still a very cool color. And I'd like to end by thanking Bernie Siegel and everyone at the World Stem Cell Summit. I think it's such an important event. It's one of the few that brings together the researchers, the scientists, and the patients and patient advocates, and has them on an equal footing. And I think for that reason alone, it's so important that we all keep supporting it and hope it carries on for many, many years to come. And with that, I'll say thank you for being part of this. Thank you for listening and watching, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.